Thanksgiving at my mom's house had always been more of a performance than a celebration. Smiles were staged, laughter was stiff, and every compliment came with a side of criticism. But still, we showed up, me, my husband Marcus, and our 2 kids, Jordan and Maya, like we always did. This year, though, something felt weird. Not in a dramatic, crash the car kind of way, more like the feeling when a storm's brewing, but the sky's still blue. You can't quite point to what's wrong, but your gut's already tightening. We walked in, arms full of pie and gifts, and at first glance, it was all perfectly curated. Candles flickering on the mantel, that overly sweet scent of cinnamon potpourri clinging to every surface. My mom had outdone herself with the table gold accents, matching plates, one of those fake rustic centerpieces she probably spent hours arranging. I exhaled. Maybe this year would actually be okay? Nope. Things started unraveling right after dinner, during the little gift exchange my parents started a few years ago. It wasn't a big deal, just something for the grandkids, usually. Small stuff, like coloring books or puzzles. But not this time. This time, it felt like a mini awards ceremony. My nephews and nieces tore open new iPads, led gaming headsets, brand name sneakers, way beyond small tokens. The kids were screaming with excitement, and my mom was glowing as they hugged her. I waited for the moment she'd hand something to Jordan and Maya. It never came. I glanced at Marcus. He was already tense, his smile frozen. Jordan and Maya sat politely, trying to act like they didn't notice. But of course, they noticed. You'd have to be blind not to. I tried to laugh it off, gently asking, "Hey, Mom, did you forget Jordan and Maya's gifts?" Her smile vanished. "No, I didn't forget," she said, arms folded. "We didn't get them anything." Silence. Like, drop a pin, suck the air out of the room silence. "Wait, what?" I asked, thinking maybe she was joking. She wasn't. "They don't deserve it," she said flatly. "And honestly, neither do you." Maya reached for my hand. Jordan's face went blank, his go-to when he doesn't want anyone to know he's upset. Around us, no one moved. My brother Tom glanced away. My cousins all exchanged nervous looks, but nobody said a word. Just like that, the evening imploded. Marcus touched my shoulder, leaned in, and said, "Let's go." And I knew, without him saying more, that he meant really go, not just leave the house. Leave them. So I stood up, took my kids by the hands, and walked out. No yelling, no theatrics, just the heavy, echoing slam of the front door behind us. The drive home was the quietest I've ever experienced. Maya was the first to break the silence. "Why didn't Grandma get us anything?" she asked, voice cracking. I could barely swallow. "I don't know, honey," I lied. Because the truth was disgusting. My parents saw love as transactional. Give only if you get something in return. And I had dared to stop giving. A few months ago, they'd asked me to co-sign on a second mortgage. They said their roof was leaking, pipes bursting, all sorts of disasters. I paid for the whole repair, $19,000 in total. But when I told them I couldn't cover the new kitchen remodel they suddenly wanted, the cold shoulder began. They didn't just punish me, they punished my kids, their grandkids. That was the line. Back at home, Marcus and I sat in the dark living room. The only light came from the hallway nightlight and the dim glow of the microwave clock. He looked at me and said quietly, "It's time." "I know," I replied, and I meant it. The next morning, I got up early, called my cousin Lacey, who happened to be managing the renovation at my parents' place. "Hey, Lace, cancel everything." She hesitated. "Wait, what?" "No more plumbing, no kitchen, no flooring, nothing. They're on their own." "You sure about this?" she asked. "They made it clear we're not family. I'm just returning the favor." By noon, the call started. First, my brother Tom, ignored. Then my dad, declined. Finally, my mom, I picked up. "You've completely lost your mind," she barked. "Lacey just told us you pulled out of the renovations. The house is half demolished." "Yeah," I said calmly. "And now it can stay that way. What is wrong with you? After everything we've done for you." I cut her off. "What exactly have you done for me? Aside from manipulating, guilt-tripping, and humiliating my kids? They need to learn that life doesn't hand out rewards for bad behavior," she snapped. "Bad behavior? They sat quietly and politely at your dinner table while you gave out expensive gifts to every other child but them." She didn't respond. I took a breath, then added, "If you're trying to guilt me back into submission, It's not going to work. We're done." And I hung up. 10 minutes later, Tom showed up at my front door. "You can't do this," he said, walking past me into the hallway like he owned the place. "Hi to you, too," I muttered. "Mom and Dad are freaking out. You just left them high and dry. Did you offer to pay for their kitchen?" "That's not the point," he snapped. "No, Tom," I said, crossing my arms. "That is exactly the point. They thought you'd take care of it." "Of course they did," I said, "because I always have." He rubbed his temples. "Look, I know what they did was messed up, but that's just how Mom is. She says stuff she doesn't mean. Well, she meant it enough to treat my kids like they were invisible." Tom paused. "You're still their daughter, and I'm a mother now. That comes first." He stared at me for a long time. Then, finally, he muttered, "You'll regret this." I smiled. "No, I think for once, I won't." Tom left without another word, and I just stood there staring at the door, heart pounding like I'd run a marathon. It's funny, isn't it? You spend your whole life keeping the peace, playing the good daughter, biting your tongue so hard. It bleeds, and the moment you finally stand up for yourself, suddenly, you're the villain. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel sad. What I felt was tired, exhausted from years of being expected to carry the emotional and financial weight of people who treated me like a bank with a pulse. Marcus found me still in the hallway and didn't say anything. He just reached out and pulled me into a hug, letting me rest my forehead on his chest while the silence wrapped around us. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "You okay?" "No," I said honestly, "but I'm done." The next morning, I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the banking app on my phone. There it was, that old joint account I'd opened years ago to help manage my parents' bills. Back then, it felt like the responsible thing to do. They were getting older, forgetful, and I thought, why not make it easier for everyone? Now I just saw it for what it was, a faucet they never turned off. Without flinching, I transferred the remaining balance into my personal savings and shut the account down. Just like that, no ceremony, no second guessing. Within 5 minutes, my phone rang. "Mom." I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. "Dad," declined. Finally, a text from Tom. "You seriously shut the account?" "What the hell, Sarah?" I didn't respond. And I won't lie, it felt good. It felt like the first clean breath after being underwater too long. By the time lunch rolled around, the calls had tripled. Mom finally got me on the line after I answered out of pure curiosity, wanted to hear what she'd say. When she realized the free ride was officially over, her voice came through sharp, brittle. "What did you do?" "I closed the account," I said calmly. "It's my money. You don't need anything from me, remember?" "That money was for the family," she snapped. "You had no right." I laughed. "You mean the same family that iced out my kids on Thanksgiving for sport?" There was a pause too long, and when she spoke again, her tone had changed. Softer, but not sincere, just strategic. "Sarah, sweetheart, you're overreacting. We were just trying to teach a lesson. That's all." "A lesson?" I repeated, my voice flat. "You mean humiliating my children in front of everyone? Was that the lesson? Because if it was, they learned it." "Don't twist things," she shot back. "This is exactly why we're always at odds. You take everything so personally." "Oh, I'm sorry," I said with mock surprise. "I should have known it was my fault. Your behavior keeps blowing up in your face." She huffed. "You'll regret this. The whole family thinks you've gone off the rails." "Let them," I said. "At least I'm not pretending anymore." And I hung up. That night, Marcus and I curled up on the couch. The kids were asleep upstairs. I had just finished folding laundry when he said, "You did the right thing." I nodded, but there was a knot in my stomach. I couldn't shake. Not guilt, something else. Like I was standing on a cliff edge, and even though I'd taken the leap, I was still waiting for the crash. "They're not done," I said quietly. "I know my parents. They're not going to go quietly. They'll try something." Marcus nodded. "And we'll handle it." He always made it sound so simple, but I knew how far my parents were willing to go when they felt cornered. They'd spin stories, turn family against me, even weaponize my silence if it meant regaining control. Still, for the first time, I wasn't scared. I was ready. By the weekend, the gossip had begun. Cousin Bri texted me, "Hey, I don't know what happened, but everyone's saying you stole from Grandma and Grandpa." I rolled my eyes and sent back, "Nope, just stopped funding their house. You know, the one I already spent 20 grand fixing." She never replied. Then came the Facebook posts. Vague little pity party updates from my mom like, "So sad when family turns their back on the ones who raised them. We do everything out of love and get cruelty in return." Followed by comments like, "Sending prayers from people who hadn't spoken to us in years. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so pathetic." Then Lacey, my cousin and the project manager for their renovation, called. "Girl," she said, half laughing, half exhausted, "you have no idea the chaos you unleashed. They're melting down." "I figured," I said. "They tried to convince me to keep going with the renovation and send the bills to you directly." I snorted. "Of course they did. Don't worry. I shut that down fast," she said. "But just a heads up, Aunt Karen is saying you pulled the plug because you're emotionally unstable." I sighed. Emotionally unstable is what they call women who stop letting people walk all over them. "Facts," she said. "And for the record, you're not alone. A bunch of us have been through it with them. You just finally snapped first." That gave me pause. "Wait, really?" "Oh yeah," she said. "You were just their biggest ATM." 3 days later, Tom showed up again. This time, he looked different. Less angry. More tired. "They need help," he said without even saying hello. "They're behind on everything. Credit cards, heating, materials, everything's frozen. The second floor is still gutted." I crossed my arms. And they're scared. "So?" He rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm not saying what they did was okay. I'm just saying they're mom and dad. And I'm a mother now," I replied. "I pick my family. My kids come first." He nodded slowly. "I get that. I do. Honestly, watching you say no, it made me realize how much I've been saying yes to stuff I shouldn't." I looked at him, surprised. "Really?" "Yeah," he said. "They've been manipulating me too, just not as openly." We stood there quietly for a moment before he added, "You're not wrong, Sarah." I just wasn't ready to admit it before. Later that night, Marcus and I sat outside on the porch. The air was cold, but it felt good, bracing, clean. "You think they'll stop?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, but they'll have to get used to not having you in their pocket." I exhaled slowly, watching my breath fog in the air. "I didn't want this," I whispered. "I just wanted them to care about the kids." "They don't know how to care unless it benefits them," he said gently. "And that's not your fault." I closed my eyes for a second and let the words sink in. He was right. I'd been chasing something that never existed, a version of love that was conditional from the start, but I wasn't chasing anymore. It happened just like I knew it would. 1 week after I pulled the plug, after the money dried up, after the joint account went dark, they showed up. I was in the kitchen making grilled cheese for Maya when Marcus walked in, holding my phone like it was something toxic. "They're here." I froze. "Who?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The knock came before I could ask again, sharp, fast, like a warning. I put the spatula down and wiped my hands on a dish towel. My stomach tightened, not from fear, but something heavier, like I'd been bracing for this conversation since childhood, and finally reached the moment it couldn't be avoided. When I opened the door, there they were. My mother stood rigid, her lips pressed tight, eyes darting behind me. My father looked like he hadn't slept in days, jaw clenched, shoulders tense. They didn't look angry. They looked cornered. "Sarah," my mom said, her voice soft in that way she used when she wanted to manipulate without sounding harsh. "We need to talk." I didn't invite them in. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "You didn't want to talk when you told my kids they didn't deserve gifts." My father cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "That's not what we meant." I raised an eyebrow. "You literally said they didn't deserve anything. So, what exactly did you mean?" They exchanged glances, like they hadn't expected me to come out swinging. My mom straightened her blouse, then said, "Things got out of hand. We let the emotions take over. That's all." I didn't move. I didn't blink. No apology. Just excuses. "And now you're here because the house is a mess. And the money stopped," I said flatly. My mom hesitated, but finally nodded. "Yes, the second floor is incomplete. Contractors won't come back without payment. We've got exposed wires and no insulation. It's freezing at night, so now I matter," I said quietly. "We didn't say you didn't matter," she said. "You didn't have to," I said. "You made it loud and clear." They stood in silence for a moment, shifting their weight like kids caught sneaking out. Then my dad spoke, voice low but tight. "We made a mistake. But this is serious, Sarah. We need your help." There it was. Not regret. Not real remorse. just desperation dressed up as humility. I let out a breath and stepped back, not to let them in, but to make it clear where I stood. "You hurt my kids," I said, "and not by accident. You planned it. You watched them sit there confused and crushed, and you said nothing. We were trying to make a point." "What point?" I cut in. "That they should suffer because I wouldn't pay for your kitchen backsplash?" My mom's face twitched, like I'd said something vulgar. "We thought you were being selfish." I let that sit in the air for a moment before I replied, my voice calm, measured. "You know what's selfish? Expecting your grown daughter to be your retirement plan. Expecting her to shell out tens of thousands while you throw parties and pretend she's ungrateful when she says enough." My dad opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "No, I'm not doing this. You had every chance to treat me and your grandkids with respect, and you chose control. So what now?" My mom snapped, her mask slipping for just a second. "You're just going to abandon your parents?" I looked her dead in the eye. "No, I'm doing exactly what you did to me years ago. I'm setting boundaries. You call it abandonment because you're finally feeling what I felt for years." They left without saying goodbye. My mom's heels clacked against the porch, sharp and angry. My dad followed, shoulders hunched, defeated. I didn't watch them drive away. I closed the door, turned the lock, and exhaled like I hadn't breathed since the moment they knocked. Maya peeked into the kitchen, eyes wide. "Was that Grandma?" "Yeah," I said gently, crouching down beside her. "But she's not staying. Are we in trouble?" she whispered. That question cracked something in me. I shook my head quickly. "No, baby. Not even close." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety, but from the silence. Real silence. The kind that follows after years of noise guilt, expectations, veiled threats. It was almost too quiet. I sat on the couch, scrolling through old texts from my mom. There they were, lines like, "Any update on the contractor?" Or, "We're short this month. Can you cover the flooring?" Not even a thank you. Just invoices disguised as conversations. I scrolled further back and found the last time she asked about the kids. 6 months ago. And even then, it was just, did Maya get taller? She looks different in that photo. It hit me then. They didn't really know my children. Not who they were, what they loved, what scared them. They weren't grandparents. They were critics. And for too long, I'd mistaken blood for love. The next few days were quiet. No calls, no texts, not even a Facebook post. Part of me wondered if they were planning something, some dramatic family ambush or public guilt campaign. But then Lacey called again. "They're spiraling," she said. Tried to get Uncle Nick to co-sign for a loan, but he said no. Then they guilted Aunt Jean, but she told them straight up, "She's not touching anything you backed out of." I sat back in my chair. So, people are seeing it now? Girl, finally. They're realizing it was never about just this renovation. It's about how they treat people. I didn't say anything right away. "Sarah," she added, "I know it feels messy now, but you're not alone. Honestly, most of us are proud of you." That one stuck with me. Proud. I hadn't heard that word from my own parents I couldn't even remember when. And yet, here it was, coming from someone who had nothing to gain by saying it. 2 days later, I was pulling into the driveway when I saw Tom's car already there. He met me at the front step, looking more tired than usual. "Hey," he said. "I wanted to tell you before you heard it somewhere else." I raised an eyebrow. "Tell me what?" "They're considering selling the house." That took me off guard. "What?" "They don't have a choice," he said. "They can't afford the repairs. No one will lend them money. Contractors have all blacklisted them. They're trying to pretend they've got options, but they don't." I leaned against the railing, staring out at the neighborhood. The house I grew up in, the one I spent years trying to fix for them. It was going to be someone else's now. Not because of me, but because of what they did to drive me away. Tom followed my gaze. "They're going to say it's your fault, that you forced them out. They've been blaming me for everything since I turned 16, I said. "What's one more thing?" That night, I sat outside again. It was getting colder. The leaves had all but dropped. The air smelled like burnt wood in early winter. Marcus brought out 2 mugs of tea and sat next to me. "You okay?" "I think so," I said. "But also, not really." He nodded like he understood. "It's a weird kind of grief, isn't it?" "Yeah, not losing them. Just finally accepting what they are." We sat in silence for a long time. Not awkward, just real. And for the first time in forever, I realized something. I didn't owe anyone an apology for protecting my peace. Not even my parents. I should have known it wouldn't end there. Quiet doesn't mean peace, not in my family. In my family, silence is a setup, a calm before the next guilt wave. And sure enough, the storm rolled in faster than I expected. It started small. A cousin's birthday brunch I wasn't invited to. A group photo on Facebook captioned, "Family always sticks together." Cute. Then came the calls I didn't answer, and the messages I didn't open. I knew exactly what they said without reading a word. But the final straw came from a place I hadn't expected, Jordan's school. I was waiting in the pickup line when his teacher flagged me down, her expression tight. "Hey, Miss S. Reynolds," she said carefully. "Can we talk for a second?" "Sure," I said, heart already thudding. "You know that feeling you just know." She led me aside, lowered her voice. "Jordan's been quieter lately, less engaged. He got into a small argument with another student today." "About what?" She hesitated. The other student made a comment. "Something about your family, saying Jordan's mom doesn't love her parents anymore." I blinked. "What?" "It sounded like something he overheard from adults," she added gently. The air around me dropped 10 degrees. My throat went dry. "Thanks for letting me know," I managed. "I'll talk to him." On the way home, I asked Jordan about it. He was quiet at first. Then he muttered, "Eli said his mom said you abandoned Grandma and Grandpa, that you only care about money." I felt the blood drain from my face. I pulled the car over, turned toward him. "Look at me." He did. "You know that's not true, right?" He nodded slowly. But his eyes, those smart, sensitive, too old for his age eyes, were clouded with something that looked an awful lot like shame. I sat back, staring through the windshield. They didn't just come for me. Now they were coming for my kids. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor in my room, laptop open, phone buzzing every few minutes with alerts I didn't check. Something inside me had shifted. Again. The first shift was quiet walking away. But this one was louder, firmer. No more playing defense. No more waiting for them to behave decently. It was time to stop hoping they'd change. It was time to draw the line in ink. The next morning, I wrote a message. Not a text. Not an email. A post. I wasn't even planning to share it publicly at first. But the more I typed, the more I realized I wasn't just writing for myself. I was writing for every person who'd ever been guilted into silence, blamed for standing up, or dragged through the mud by people who called themselves family. So I posted it, just a photo of Jordan and Maya smiling on Thanksgiving morning. And the caption, "We showed up with full hearts and open hands." They left with nothing but judgment and silence. I stayed quiet, not because I was guilty, but because I thought eventually love would matter more than control. It didn't. So now I'm done explaining. My kids deserve better than conditional affection. I won't apologize for protecting them. If standing up for my children makes me the villain, I'll wear that crown with pride. I turned off my phone. 2 hours later, the post had exploded. Texts, shares, comments, DMs from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were angry, some were stunned, some just said thank you. But my favorite came from my cousin Danielle. "I never had the guts to say any of this, but I'm so proud of you. I hope your kids know what a warrior their mom is." I cried reading that one. Not because of the words, but because someone finally saw me. Not as a resource, not as a troublemaker, just as a mother trying her damn best. Of course, not everyone took it well. My mother called 3 times. I ignored them all. Then Tom texted, "That post is everywhere. What are you trying to do?" I didn't reply. 2 days later, there was a knock at my door again. "Tom, just hear me out," he said before I could tell him to leave. "They're losing it. They think you're trying to destroy their reputation." "Funny," I said, leaning against the doorway. "I thought they did that all by themselves." "You made it public," he argued. "They dragged my kid into it first." He exhaled, deflating a little. "Yeah, that was messed up." There was a pause. Then he looked at me, serious this time. "I think you're right, Sarah. I think. I've been too afraid to admit how much damage they've done. To me, to you, to all of us." That caught me off guard. For a second, he looked like the brother I remembered. The one who used to make me laugh with dumb impressions and sneak me candy under the dinner table. I softened. "What changed?" He shrugged. "Watching you stop taking it. The next few days were a blur of messages and revelations. Turns out I wasn't the only one. 3 other cousins reached out with stories. Years of control, silent treatment, emotional manipulation, all swept under the rug. Lacey, always blunt, put it best on our call that night. They built their little kingdom on guilt. And now, it's collapsing. I laughed. Yeah, well, I'm not sending in the rescue squad. You shouldn't, she said. You already did more than enough. One morning, Jordan asked if he could write something for school. About Thanksgiving, he said. My stomach clenched. You sure? He nodded. I just want to talk about how sometimes family is who you feel safe with. I blinked hard, nodded. Later, he showed me his paragraph. It read, "This Thanksgiving, I learned that you don't have to keep people close if they make you feel small. You can still love them, but from far away." I had to excuse myself to the bathroom just to cry. My kid had already figured out what took me decades to learn. Tom texted me a few days later. They're trying to sell the house. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel sorry. I just felt still. They're saying you ruined them, he added. I replied simply, no, they did that to themselves. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. The for sale sign went up the next week. Tom had been right. They were out of options. No money, no help, no more favors to cash in. The house I grew up in, the same one I once paid to save, was now just another listing on a real estate site. I didn't drive by. I didn't need to. The image was already burned into my memory. Brick steps, worn shutters, that crooked mailbox Dad never fixed. A house full of noise that never really felt like home. But then something happened I didn't expect. Tom called. Mom asked me to go through the attic, he said. See if anything's worth keeping before the agent does the walkthrough. I waited, sensing he hadn't called just to tell me that. I found something, he added. You should see it. The attic hadn't changed since we were kids. Same dusty boxes, same mothball smell, same yellowed light bulb dangling from the ceiling. It took one flick of the switch to bring it all back, hiding up there during arguments. Flipping through old yearbooks, trying to disappear, Tom handed me a small, beat-up shoebox. It had my name on it, written in Mom's handwriting. I sat down on an overturned storage bin and slowly lifted the lid. Inside were scraps of paper, a few faded photos, and a folder. I pulled out the folder. Bills, receipts, loan papers, all in my name. My stomach turned. They had taken out a personal loan years ago and listed me as the co-signer, without ever telling me. I flipped through each page, my hands trembling. All paid off now, but still, it was real. A paper trail of deception, my signature forged, my trust stolen long before I ever said no to their kitchen remodel. I looked up at Tom. I didn't know, he said, his voice tight. I swear, I believed him. He looked just as stunned as I felt. And in that moment, everything fell into place. The guilt trips, the entitlement, the anger when I finally said enough. It had never been about the kitchen or the renovation. It was about control, and I'd been under their thumb far longer than I realized. Later that night, I sat on my porch, the folder in my lap. Marcus stepped outside with 2 mugs of tea, wordlessly sitting next to me. I handed him the papers. He flipped through them, jaw tightening. They forged your name. I nodded. He didn't say I told you so. He didn't need to. We both knew this was bigger than anything they'd ever admit to. This wasn't just emotional abuse. This was fraud. I could press charges, I said quietly, almost to myself. You could, he said, and you'd be justified. I stared out at the street. The world felt tilted, like the floor had shifted underneath me. Again, but I won't, I finally said. Why? Because I don't need revenge. I already won. He looked at me, waiting. I've got my family, my peace. My kids are growing up without that weight. That's more than they'll ever understand. The next day, I scanned the documents into a folder on my computer. I labeled it just in case, not to use, but to have. To remind myself that what I left behind wasn't love. It was manipulation in a costume. A week later, the house sold, below asking price. I heard through the grapevine they had to take the first offer. No time, no leverage. The renovations were still half done, walls missing, wires exposed. A perfect metaphor, honestly. A house full of cracks, built on silence. They moved into a rental across town. Nothing fancy, just enough. And from what I heard, they were already bickering with the neighbors. No one, from the family offered to help. For once, I wasn't the only one who said no. Then came the message, not from my parents, from their real estate agent. Apparently, during the final walkthrough, they found an old keepsake box hidden behind the insulation in the upstairs closet. It had my name on it. They figured I might want it. I met her in a coffee shop the next day. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, kind eyes. She handed me the box like it was something fragile. Inside, I found old report cards, childhood drawings, letters I'd written to Santa, and tucked in the bottom, my high school journal. I hadn't seen it in years. I opened to a random page. Sometimes I think if I disappeared, they wouldn't notice until dinner. I stopped reading, closed the book, and something inside me cracked open, not in pain, but in release. That version of me, the quiet girl who tried so hard to make her parents proud she didn't disappear. She grew up. She found her voice. And she learned that love without respect isn't love at all. I kept the box, not because I needed it, but because it was proof that I was always enough, even when they didn't see it. 2 nights later, Jordan asked me if we could bake cookies. Just us, he said, like a new tradition. So we did. Maya helped pour the chocolate chips. Marcus danced in the background like a goof, making them laugh. Flour everywhere, music playing low, laughter echoing in the kitchen. And for once, I didn't feel like I was rebuilding something broken. I was building something new. The past didn't own me anymore. It was just a story. And I was finally the one telling it. After the house sold, everything got quiet. Not the eerie kind, the kind that hums softly in the background, when something heavy has finally been laid down, like a weight you didn't realize you were dragging for years, suddenly dropped behind you. The silence wasn't scary anymore. It was peaceful. Maya stopped asking about Grandma. Jordan stopped glancing at his phone like he expected a call that never came. Marcus slept easier. So did I. We were, for the first time, living without waiting for the next guilt trip. Then, one morning, as spring started pushing winter out of the way, I got a letter. An actual letter envelope, stamp, cursive handwriting I hadn't seen in years. My mother. Marcus watched me open it, quiet but ready. He didn't say anything, just sat beside me at the table as I unfolded the page. No dear Sarah, no apology, just 4 sentences. We never thought you'd go through with it. You chose them over us. I hope you're happy. Don't bother replying. I stared at the page. I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not relief. Just the final click of a door I didn't realize was still open, closing gently behind me. I slid the letter across the table. Marcus read it, then looked at me. You okay? I nodded. Yeah, I am. And I meant it. That night, I took the letter outside and burned it in a metal bowl on the patio. The flames licked the paper, curling the edges until it turned black, then gray, then gone. Jordan came out halfway through. He watched the fire, then looked at me. That from Grandma? I didn't lie. Yeah. He sat beside me, pulling his knees to his chest. Are we never going to see them again? I took a breath. I don't know. But right now, we don't need to. He nodded, staring into the embers. Okay. No argument, no sadness. Just, okay. Kids have a way of accepting what we struggle to name. He knew we were safe. That was enough. Weeks passed, then months. Birthdays came and went. No cards, no calls. I didn't expect them. Instead, we made new memories. Backyard camping, board game marathons, spontaneous pizza nights in pajamas, laughing until we cried over inside jokes that no one outside our little family would ever understand. There was nothing fancy about it. No grand vacations or picture-perfect moments. Just love. Real, steady, quiet love. And not once did I have to ask if I was enough. Then one day in June, something unexpected happened. I ran into my mom at the pharmacy. It was ordinary, really. I was grabbing allergy meds. She was in the next aisle. I turned the corner, and there she was, reaching for a bottle of vitamins. We both froze. She blinked first. Her expression didn't change, much surprise, maybe. No smile, no frown, just recognition. I gave a small nod. She didn't return it. We stood there for maybe 3 seconds, then she picked up her bottle and walked away. No words, no confrontation, just a quiet passing. And somehow, that was more closure than any screaming match could have given me. I told Marcus later. He asked, "Do you wish you'd said something?" I shook my head. No. Some people talk so much that silence is the only honest thing left. He understood. A few days after that, I cleaned out the closet in the hallway, found an old box of letters, birthday cards, Mother's Day notes I'd written over the years, notes from my parents filled with praise before things turned into transactions. At the bottom was a photo of me holding baby Jordan in the hospital room, my mom beside me, smiling. I stared at it for a long time. It was strange. She looked so proud in that moment, but I couldn't remember what she said, only how fast that moment faded, how quickly her attention turned from celebration to critique, how fast I went from daughter to disappointment. I slid the photo back into the box. I wasn't angry. I just didn't need to carry it anymore. A few weeks later, Jordan's school had a family history day. He asked if he could bring a story instead of a family tree. I said, "Sure, what kind of story?" He smiled. "One where the ending is way better than the beginning." I hugged him so tight, he laughed. That's the thing, isn't it? We spend so long clinging to roots that hurt us because they're familiar, because they're deep, because we think we're supposed to. But sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is grow in a new direction. Summer turned into fall. The kids thrived. Marcus and I started talking about maybe moving somewhere quieter, starting fresh, somewhere green, somewhere ours. Not to run away, but to grow now that we finally had the room. One night, just before school started up again, Maya curled up next to me on the couch and asked, "Do we still have grandparents?" I smiled softly. "Of course you do, but we don't see them anymore." I nodded. "That's true. And sometimes people are still your family even if they're far away. And sometimes family is just the people who make you feel safe." She thought about it. "Like us? Exactly like us." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Then we're okay." And I knew she meant it. I used to think cutting someone off was the cruelest thing you could do. Now I know it's an act of love. Not for them, for yourself. For the people who rely on your strength. For the little ones watching to see what love is supposed to look like. You don't always get apologies, or understanding, or closure. But sometimes you get peace, and peace is enough. Story 2. Growing up seemed like a very typical existence to me. However, once my mother decided to marry Greg and his son Jason, who was 3 years older than me, things changed when I became 14. She came along with it. At 17, Jason was already difficult. It would be an understatement to say that we didn't get along. Issues were present from the start. Initially, it was the typical fare. Conflicts about who should clean the missing shampoo bottles and even disputes over who should do the dishes first. Jason was irresponsible, entitled, and hapless. He left his possessions around. In some way, though, I was constantly the target of screams. Greg didn't hesitate to vent his frustration at me, and my mother overlooked it all since she was preoccupied with creating the ideal house. Every time I attempted self-defense, it seemed like I was talking into a brick wall. Greg always made it sound like I was to blame for everything. When my mother and Greg announced they were having a child a year later, things took a turn for the worst. Everything really started to spin out at that moment. Unexpectedly, the house needed to be reorganized, and guess whose room they turned into a nursery? Mine. I was forced into a tiny guest room that was too small for my bed and desk. It was a straightforward declaration of my place in this new family structure, and it felt like a slap in the face. With the arrival of the new baby, Jason became even more unbearable. He brought all of his bad habits and questionable companions with him when he left college and came home. Gatherings late at night, guests in the house all day, and loud music at 3 in the morning began to become my new normal. When I attempted to discuss it with my mother or Greg, I forced myself to go to school. They looked at me pathetically or brushed it off, as though to ask, "What can we do?" It became my refuge from the madness here. I joined as many clubs as I could, took extra classes, and spent as much time as I could at friends' houses. Anything to prevent someone from going back to that chaotic home. It was a matter of survival. The uprising was not a young one. I can vividly remember one particular evening when I remained late at school to do an assignment. Too quiet, the house was deserted. Notes on the refrigerator informed me that they had left for a family dinner, to which I was not invited when I finally made it home. Unless they wanted someone to assign blame for things going wrong, it was as if I didn't exist. My breaking point came shortly after I turned 18, when I started working part-time to save money for education and some freedom. One evening when I got home, I found my room completely destroyed. When Jason hosted a party while the parents were away, my room turned into a war zone. A broken lamp, beer stains everywhere, and my project notes scattered across the floor. The next morning at breakfast, I went up to them, and Greg gave me a chilly response, rather than offering an apology. He said, barely looking up from his plate, "You ought to have handled your belongings with more caution." With a simple sigh, my mother highlighted the importance of family unity. However, I was finished. I was not going to let things go any longer. I felt like everything I did during those years was being closely watched. Not in a beneficial, let's lead you trough type of style either. More like they were waiting for me to screw up. Jason, in the meantime, could not do anything wrong. By then, he was nearly a professional couch potato, typically lazing about as I battled to keep my head above water. I recall working on a large science project that meant the world to me. Neither of which I could have at home was space or stillness. It was like attempting to work in the middle of a carnival. As I attempted organizing in the corner of the living room, Greg kept scolding me about making a mess. Jason's music was loud. My younger brother was racing about saying, "You are hogging too much space." He would claim it was bothersome. One day I was at last exhausted, having packed my project. I visited a friend's residence. Her parents were amazing. They welcomed me with open arms and allowed me to spread out my work in their dining room. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could think clearly. Here, my partner saw my facial relief. "You're always welcome," she said. And that little thing was a wake-up call and meant the world to me. This was anything from normal. Instead of being a place you are frantically fleeing from, a home should be a safe refuge. Going forward, I began putting in greater hours at my job. There was a little break from the pollution every hour spent away from home. Greg thought it was awful. Usually, Dad would rant about how it was destroying my academic career, but I knew why I wasn't there for him to point out faults and place blame. Moving out was starting to look like my only option, even though I knew it would not be simple. Even so, I knew they wouldn't like it. Walking on eggshells exhausted me. The day I was leaving, I thought my heart would burst. I found a cheap little apartment near the university and sat them down to tell them the news. I said, attempting to seem more assured than I actually was, "I'm leaving." It was unbearably silent in the room. Greg was the first to speak, and there were sarcastic slights in his voice. "Do you think you're ready to live alone at your age?" My mother only looked between us, her expression blank, and said nothing. "Yes, I am." I stated that with a lot of conviction. "I require my personal space. I have money stored up." The result was a violent altercation. Greg said he looked up to you and accused me of not appreciating things and of avoiding my responsibilities. "You are aware." He even made an effort to blame me for abandoning my younger brother. I fought back. This had less to do with desiring a house of my own and more to do with my mental health and well-being. The next several days were spent packing in a daze. My mother helped, but it was embarrassing. We seldom exchanged words. It was just superficial conversations. "Do you require more boxes? Is there anything you can do to avoid the real issue? I have some old kitchenware I can offer you." When I had last shut the door to my new apartment, I was overcome with feelings. Anxiety, excitement, sadness, and relief. I was really alone. It was awful, yet it let go of something too. The first several nights were difficult. The quiet was almost unbearable, and I found that I missed even the chaos of my old home. Nevertheless, I grew to appreciate the peace and quiet that allowed me to eat whenever I wanted, sleep well, and come and go as I liked. I felt like I was finally discovering who I was, away from the constant criticism and pressure. As I adapted to my new life and distanced myself from my family, I remained busy with my work and studies, yet not flawless. As long as I wasn't living under their roof, our relationship was under control. Finally, things were starting to look promising. Then, one evening, my mother called me. Her voice was unusually sad. She said, "Your stepdad has been thinking about his will. Instead of leaving you, Dad had chosen to leave everything to Jason and your half-brother." It hurt to hear it so directly. Not that I was expecting anything. It was not the money, but the message. I had spent years trying to fit in with a family that did not include me in their list of members. The final nail in the coffin was the will. I made an effort to ignore it, but that conversation haunted me. It seemed like all the unsafe cities I had known as a child came flooding back in that house. I began to retreat even farther, reducing visits and focusing on the individuals who truly made me feel important, my friends, instructors, and coworkers. But just when I thought I was at peace with everything, something happened that made everything better. I stopped communicating with my family a few months ago, and then something very unexpected happened. I was sitting at home one evening doing some schoolwork when a lawyer phoned. The name didn't ring a bell. As a result, I grew nervous immediately. Nevertheless, I answered curiously. "Is Emily present?" The voice inquired, formal and businesslike. "Yes, here she is." Warily, I replied. He claimed to be on behalf of my father's aunt, my grandmother, whose inheritance I hadn't given any thought to in years. Growing up, I barely knew any of their relatives. She was the type you seldom saw and only heard about at family gatherings. I vaguely remembered seeing her as a youngster, but we were not close. Based on my memory, she was quiet yet kind. She was childless herself. "I'm phoning to inform you about the death of your grandmother," the lawyer said, his tone a little more relaxed. I looked at him, trying to figure out what he had just said. "You have her entire estate." I lost my mind. Why me? Why now? I didn't really know her. Before I could respond, he continued to go into depth about the details. Much more than I ever could have imagined. Over the years, my great-aunt had become prosperous. Her assets had increased in value, and she now owned a substantial estate worth about $3 million, and I had full ownership of it. For a time, I was at a loss for words. I felt as though I had stumbled into someone else's life, which was odd. Sorrow for her passing, regret not getting to know her better, combined with a strange feeling of disbelief at having inherited so much money from someone I hardly knew. The lawyer continued by saying that my grandmother had valued my independence and my will to make something of myself. In a letter, she said that she saw a lot of herself in me, strong, independent, and willing to fight for her own path in life, especially from someone I didn't know well. I never thought I'd hear something like that from any of my relatives. I spent the following 3 days visiting with lawyers, financial advisors, and estate planners. I had to sort through investments, assets, and some personal belongings. For me, she went, it was exhausting, to say the least. On the other hand, it offered a chance. For the first time in my life, I truly felt in charge of my destiny. Having a home and a somewhat comfortable environment made me appreciate how wonderful it was to finally have my own place. No more cramped visitor quarters. I no longer feel like I was forced to leave a family that didn't want me. It was this house. Each area appeared to be a new beginning, preparing for long-term financial security. In addition, I purchased a rental home. I wanted to make sure that this money was useful to me and wasn't just wasted. It continued for the remainder. I invest and save, taking care to speak with professionals in areas that are important to me. I wasn't going to let this opportunity go away. For a while, I kept the news to myself, mostly to avoid any commotion. I didn't tell my relatives about this. However, secrets tend to come to light. Shortly later, my cousin found out, and word spread swiftly. Within a few days, she discovered that my phone was blazing with texts and calls from family members I hadn't spoken to in years. At first, she pretended to want to catch up, which was subtle. When my mother called, I had a feeling that something wasn't right. She was too interested in my life and asking too many questions about my financial status. After that, the conversations changed from casual check-ins to explicit demands that seemed to indicate a desire for a share of my wealth. My stepdad started calling and asking for loans to help fix their house. After months of not seeing me, Jason suddenly wanted to get back in touch, which was just code for asking for money. Everyone seemed to see dollar signs when they looked at me. All they wanted was a share of the pie. They didn't care about my life or circumstances. It was frustrating and heartbreaking all at once. These were people who had been making me feel out of place for years. They wanted me back in my life, now that I had something of value. One day, my mother fell over without warning. I hadn't seen her in weeks, so I figured she would attempt to have one of those let's talk moments. But as soon as she entered, I realized she wasn't here for that. She took a seat to talk about their financial struggles, how Jason was annoying her at home and had gone back to college again. She described how their finances had been impacted by my stepdad's illness and how my younger brother's private school expenses were depleting their funds. She was not subtle in the direction of this discourse. She turned to face me directly at last and said, We're family, Emily. You know, we have gone through a lot together, and I feel it is only reasonable that you support us. We could very much need $1 million. You can't really afford it at the moment." My heart fell. The big ask was right there. She ignored me in favor of the money. I was asked to preserve them by the same mother who had allowed Greg to push me away for years. $1 million too. It seemed as if she thought I would simply throw it away like pocket money. I tried to sound calm as I corrected her. "This money isn't for you, Mom. For me too. After years of trying to discover my own way, you want to take what I have for yourself at last." It wasn't well received by her. "For years, you have made it clear that I am not a true member of this family." Her expression hardened, and she began to rant about how unappreciative I was and how I had no right to keep the money since it basically came from my father's side of the family. She claimed that since Jason and my younger brother were family, it was my responsibility to take care of them. She even tried to make me feel guilty. I had the freedom to live my life as I saw fit, therefore I was done. I refused to allow them to drag me back into that turmoil. I told her no, softly but firmly, and she stormed out of my house, terminating our conversation after too many years of trying to fit in with a family that didn't want me. Shortly after, Jason and my stepdad start making more disagreeable calls. Instead of asking questions, they were making demands. Jason informed me that I owed him for all the years we had lived together, and that I couldn't just leave my family now that I had money, even if he had done nothing with his life. I received lengthy, guilt-tripping notes from my stepdad, but in reality, they had rejected me years before. All they did was elevate me. I have something they wanted today. My mother's text message informing me that I didn't deserve any of the inheritance was the final straw that finally got to me. She accused me of being a selfish thief. Over and over I read the message, my stomach turning with a mix of grief and rage. People who were meant to love and help me. My family were calling me names since I refused to turn over money that was rightly mine. That evening, I banned her phone. I have nothing else to choose from. They were not going to stop. Hence, I had to defend myself, however emotionally hard. The 3 days that followed were likewise illuminating. I realized that this was not about money, but about setting boundaries and finally standing up for myself. Over the next 3 weeks, I stopped communicating with them altogether. At last, the calls slowed down and ceased altogether. First, although I was relieved, it also validated my long-held suspicion that they valued me more for what I could provide than for who I was. I knew I had made the right decision, even if it hurt. I was no longer constrained by their expectations and could live my life as I saw fit. In my life, for the first time, I thought the drama had finally ended after the separation with my family. I was starting to adjust to my new routine and enjoy the peace of mind that comes with not having to deal with their constant wants. When I heard a new twist was thrown at me, it started with a formal-looking letter that was stamped and sealed and dispatched from a law firm I had never heard of. When I initially read it, I was devastated because I thought it could have anything to do with my great-aunt's inheritance. My mother had me in lawsuit. Yes, you heard right. I was sued by my own mother, who claimed she was entitled to a portion of my wealth. I recall sitting there, incredulity riveted on the letter, although I knew my mother had been irritated by my not sending her any money. It never occurred to me that she would get this far, because my father's side of the family made the bequest. Although it was a ridiculous argument, the lawsuit claimed that she was the rightful owner of it. She was clearly in dire need. All she wanted was to get her hands on the cash. She didn't care that it was legal for me to leave. My stepdad messaged me shortly after, acting as if the lawsuit wasn't enough. One of those long, tirade novels that is full of manipulation and guilt-tripping. In an attempt to play the victim, he claimed that I was the one ruining the family by not acting morally, and that they had always treated me like one of their own. He told me that I was being selfish, and that I would regret not sharing the money. Now I could see the irony telling me that I had a duty to look after them. Since I wasn't truly family, this same man had cut me out of his will. It was almost absurd. As angry as I wasn't going to allow them to intimidate me into giving up what was rightfully mine. I immediately called my lawyer after showing him the letter. He chuckled. Really? One glimpse at it. He argued the case had no legitimacy and that my mother had legal leg to back her stance. The will was excellent. My great aunt had verified that. Still, it did not ease the stress in the situation. I never anticipated I would have to cope with having to go through a legal struggle with my own mother. The following 3 days were a cloud of papers, calls, and legal sessions. He gave me his word that we would win the lawsuit, but the whole process saps me. How had things become this bad? I kept thinking, how had the person supposed to love and encourage me, my own mother, to become someone who saw me as nothing more than a money account? It was not merely the lawsuit either. Distant relatives, folks I hadn't heard from in years, began phoning me. My mother apparently had been telling everyone I had taken the fortune, and they were all anxious to let me know how let down they felt in me. It seemed as though my family had morphed into a band of vultures, circling about, waiting for me to cave in. I filtered most of their numbers. I could not stand the constant barrage of deception and guilt trips. Even when the phone conversations ended, the tension remained. There wasn't much I could do. My mother was out there smearing the ground with my name. I could only hope that everything would settle down and wait for the litigation to be resolved. After that, at this point, I largely resorted to my friends. They were the only ones who truly supported me. They made it clear to me that my mother and stepfather's behavior was motivated more by their own greed and sense of entitlement than by me. It was just what I required. As suggested by one of my closest friends, we took a trip to get away from it all. I hadn't given myself any time since the inheritance issue started, so the idea of momentarily running away felt like a pipe dream. After packing, we headed down the road. It was a simple road trip to some places we had always talked about seeing. Nothing special. Nevertheless, the change of scenery was just what I needed. For the first time in months, I could breathe. We enjoyed the freedom of being away from all the family strife while hiking through national parks and dining at small eateries. Days. What are your goals for the remainder of your life? We were sitting on a rock looking into a valley when my friend questioned me about one of our excursions. It seemed like a simple enough query, yet it had a profound impact. I hadn't given my desires much thought. I had devoted so much of my time to dealing with my family's foolishness and trying to defend what I had inherited. I had lived a life of survival, surviving in the toxic environment at home, enduring for the longest time the emotional turmoil of rejection and exclusion, as well as the sudden inheritance and all of its associated burdens. But what did I really want? I desired to take the lead. What sort of existence? I had time to think about such things on the journey. I realized that, in contrast to most others, I could shape my future whatever I wanted. When I got back from the vacation, I felt more concentrated than I had in a long time. I was financially secure enough to do things the way I wanted to, and I wasn't going to let anyone, family or not, take that away from me. I had stopped letting my family's strategies control me. Even if the lawsuit would not be resolved, I came to the realization that I had to completely sever my relationship with them. Family responsibilities or guilt tripping wouldn't change the fact that they had showed me who they were. Things settled down throughout the course of the following several weeks. The lawsuit, which was handled by my counsel, was essentially immediately dismissed. They just paid some shady person to scare me. The lawyer for my mom was scarcely a threat. After the issue was dismissed, I thought, maybe, just maybe, that would be the last of it. Naturally, however, it wasn't. My mother and stepfather accused me of splitting the family and making a grave mistake by not dispersing the wealth. Thus, the discharge did not go well. I received a lengthy, bitter email from my stepdad. One day, I would regret it, he continued, recognizing the importance of family. But it would be too late by then. I didn't think to respond. It had no significance. I refused to let them entice me back into their toxic games. Nothing was going to change. Cutting them off was the best decision I've ever made, even though it hurt. I was finally able to focus on myself and my future objectives because of their unrelenting animosity. I started working on projects I'd put off for years, such as classes on subjects I was really interested in and real estate investments. I also began assisting local companies, something I'd always wanted to do but had never had the time or resources to accomplish before, so it made sense to go back into the community. As if I were doing something important with my inheritance, it allowed me to shift my focus from the family conflict to something positive. With time, the pain of my family's betrayal started to lessen. I still occasionally pondered how my mother, who I admired, could have changed to a person who viewed me as merely a revenue generator. but I was no longer influenced by those ideas. Not what I could give them. I was moving on, creating a life for myself and surrounded by people who really loved me. Then something extraordinary occurred. I got a letter in the mail, this one from my younger half-brother, rather than from a lawyer at barely 14. His letter was honest, yet uncomfortable. In it, he stated he missed me, that he didn't want things to be this way, and apologized for all that had occurred. Though tiny, it meant more to me than anything else my family had produced. I began to know that, in spite of everything, I did not want to lock the door on him, fully yet young. He was trapped in the heart of all this commotion. And perhaps, just maybe, we might reestablish some form of relationship. We began chatting irregularly. Nothing more than a brief talk about his interests and schooling. Though tiny, it was a beginning. From there, I wasn't sure where things would go, but I knew I was open to the potential of reuniting with him in a way that would be healthy for both of us. As it occurred, life was much peaceful, devoid of family friction. And for the first time in years, I approved of that. I didn't need their approval, validation, or monetary devotion. I'd made something superior, a life where I was in command, surrounded by those that cherished me for who I was, not for what I was capable of producing. By the time everything settled down, I had accepted that I would never have the familial support I so much desired in my life. Instead, I had built my own family via mentors, friends, and people who really cared about my well-being, not because of what I could provide them. My half-brother called me again a few months after. We started chatting more often. Despite this newfound calm, I still had one more surprise in store for me. This time, his voice sounded different, even though he was a teenager dealing with personal problems. He sounded more somber and deliberate. "Hey, Emily," he said, a bit reluctantly. "I wanted to know whether you would be open to meeting with your parents, even though I know we don't talk about them very much. I am aware of how awful they have been. Therefore, even though they have been talking a lot about wanting to work things out with you, I don't hold you accountable for avoiding. The situation at home is not good." I felt a variety of emotions. On the one hand, I had fought to create limits and shelter myself from the guilt-tripping and emotional manipulation my family had subjected me through. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore my younger brother since he was attempting to reach out in a genuine manner. To be honest with him, though, I wasn't sure whether I was prepared to open that door again. I answered, "I don't know, Eli. I've been attempting to move on for a while. They have caused me great harm. I understand. I doubt that I could return to the previous state of affairs." "Yes, I do," simply said. "Things are challenging. Dad has once again become ill. Mom, she isn't handling it, though." I remained silent for a minute as I considered his words. A lot of what happened is something she regrets. I wanted to make amends, to acknowledge their mistakes, and think they had changed. However, I was wise enough to avoid getting into something that might rekindle old wounds. I'd worked too hard to get better. I'll think about it. Finally, I answered, "I can't promise anything, though." We stopped there when Eli realized I must also behave in my own best interests. After the call, I gave his words a lot of thought. Even yet, I wanted to continue dating Eli. I was not prepared to go on and forgive. I didn't want to completely close the door, though. My relationship with my mother and stepfather was so strained that it felt impossible to even consider having a conversation with them. But I ended up making the right decision since life has a weird way of throwing curveballs. I got another call a few weeks later, this time from my mom. Hearing her voice startled me, as I hadn't spoken to her since the legal debacle. She had a new voice, softer, almost frail. Emily said, pausing as if she wasn't sure how to start. With years of tension and unresolved grief, the words lingered in the air. "I am aware that I am not worthy of your attention, and if you choose not to, I can understand. However, I must apologize. I have explained everything that has happened. Much reflection on how I have treated you, how I allowed Greg to shove you away, how I became blinded by money and greed. I know I can't take back what I've done, but I still want to try. I have been waiting for this apology for years, but when I heard it now, I didn't get the satisfaction I was hoping for. I wish things had turned out differently, and I miss you." The years of discomfort were not eliminated. The lawsuit's betrayal or continuous deception. Still, it seemed genuine. That was something too. "I appreciate you saying that," I said cautiously. "But you have to know that things cannot just revert to their prior state." "Mom, You abused me. Greg, and you both did this. I have constructed a life for me that does not focus on your approval or wealth. Our partnership needs to be on my terms, if we are to have any form of one." My mom remained silent for a long time. "I won't allow guilt me into anything, and I won't engage in this familial dynamic whereby I'm treated like an outsider." On the other side of the phone, I could hear her breathing and momentarily feared she may hang up. She then talked one more, her voice laden with emotion. "You are accurate," she answered kindly. "You owe nothing to us, though. It's only little steps. I just want an opportunity to do things right." I told her I would think about it, but I didn't make any promises at the time. I had an odd mixture of relief, sadness, and a tiny ray of hope that maybe, just maybe, things may be different when I hung up. In the weeks that followed, I avoided contact, but I allowed little openings in the barrier I had built around myself. I continued to text Eli, slowly reestablishing a relationship that seemed more like real family. I had a couple more cautious conversations with my mother, each one a little less stressful than the last. I didn't do anything right away, but I allowed myself to consider the possibility that both they and I may recover. I started taking business management training, increased my real estate investments, and focused more on building the life I had always desired month after month. At my previous college, I began mentoring younger students. I believed it was right to return since I was passing on the lessons life had taught me. When I left my home, I was a different person. I was stronger, more confident, and had a clearer idea of what I wanted out of life. The inheritance had changed from being a major source of stress and upheaval to becoming a means of creating the life I deserved. I had learned to manage money responsibly, mostly because to financial consultants and much study. More importantly, I had learned that money had no bearing on my worth. It has to do with the choices I made for myself and no one else, as well as the people I surrounded myself with. Over time, my family's influence on my life diminished. Although they were still there on the periphery, they were no longer able to cause the same type of harm. It was also wonderful that my mother and I were slowly rebuilding something, even if it would never be the same as it had been. I realized that certain relationships would always leave scars, but it didn't mean I would have to live with them forever. But Eli had another story to tell. He and I became closer over the ensuing years, and I made it a point to support him in ways that no one had supported me at his age, even as we built new memories. Attending his basketball games, lending a hand with his schoolwork, and just being brothers in a way we were never able to. We didn't talk much about the past. I found a genuine piece of family in him that I wanted to hold on to. We never reestablished our contact with Greg. During the few family gatherings I attended, I gave him a kind hello, but that was it. Since I didn't have any expectations of him, I was okay with it. The desire for approbation from those who had never truly known me as family was something I had learned to let go of. Instead, I focused on those that did, on the relationships I'd built, the community I'd established, and the family I'd found in unexpected places. In retrospect, I see that my family's voyage was about more than just money or inheritance. It was about finding my true self outside their expectations and standing up for myself in ways I had never done before. It was about finding the strength to say no and making the decision to design the life I wanted, even if it meant saying goodbye to individuals I had previously believed I couldn't live without. I finally realized that family is more than just blood when it came down to it. It's about the people who see you for who you really are, who stand by you through difficult times, and who support you no matter what. Maybe it's about creating your own family with the individuals that complete you, cherished and esteemed.